Right. Good evening, councillors and officers of the council and members of the public. Welcome to the meeting of the Constitutional Review Committee. Some housekeeping. Fire evacuation procedure. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Orley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise when it's safe to return. Filming. Does anyone intend filming the meeting? Any members of the public? No. Will everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber whilst the meeting is in progress. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for any items of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and the public from the meeting. Would any member who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1 please announce it now? Apologies for absence. We have apologies from councillors Fellows and Pugh. Are there any other apologies?
Carolyn Ruston. Carolyn Ruston.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Good. Minutes of the previous meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of February 2024 be approved and signed as a correct record. Could I have a seconder, please?
May I ask a question, please?
Yes, Councillor Austin.
Thank you. Under the minute on the Councillor Officer Protocol, I'm concerned that there's an issue that isn't mentioned here when we're talking about officer workload and response times and so on. There was quite a discussion about the culture that we had inherited and how we were trying to change that. This is not mentioned in the minutes, and as it's very important and reflected in, for example, the Independent Monitoring Officer's report, I do think it should be in there somewhere.
I note your comments, and can I leave that with you, Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, that's fine. We will make a note in this set of minutes.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
To Councillor Austin's comments, obviously.
So was there a second there?
Councillor Scobie. Item agenda 4. Would Ingrid Brown please present the report?
Thank you, Chair. This report is really to remedy an anomaly in the Constitution, and you'll see from the report that in Part 4 of the Constitution, the procedure is set out to for the provision of the taking of urgent decisions. However, within Part 3 in the scheme of delegation, there is no delegated authority for anyone to take urgent decisions. And so for that reason, I've made these proposals, the proposed amendments, and there's some additional amendments because the provisions are for there to be consultation with the chair of the council or the vice chair. Under the previous procedural arrangements, that was in the absence of either the chair or the vice chair, it was to be the chief exec, but I'm proposing that be the chair of the overview and scrutiny panel. So quite simple. It's really just remedying an anomaly in the Constitution, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Does anybody want to raise any questions? No. Yes, Councillor Scott.
How often has that been used in recent years? Is that something that we expect to happen regularly, infrequently, never?
Really, really infrequently, and certainly since I've been in post, I'm not aware of a single key decision, an urgent key decision being taken, and you'll see from the provisions of the Constitution that in any event they always have to be reported to full council. So certainly since I've been here, I'm not aware of any.
Infrequent. And could you, as a follow-up, Chair, if I may, could you just talk us through how that would work in practice then, just step by step? So a decision was taken, how it would be reported, what the steps are in there.
So the chief exec would take the view that there was something really, really pressing matter, and he'd have to demonstrate urgency in discussion with myself and probably the Section 151 officer and other key officers, and would no doubt try and consult with a leader in practicality. make that decision. And as you'll see from the proposals, all kind of financial regulations, procurement rules, etc., are suspended for those purposes. Once the decision is made that that's what they want to do, they'd have to consult with the chair of council to confirm that the chair was satisfied that the matter was urgent and, reasonable, justified and proportionate. And then the decision could be taken, and or the vice chair or the chair of overview and scrutiny in their absence. The decision would then be taken, and then it would have to be reported to full council at the next meeting of full council. And obviously the grounds for urgency would need to be apparent. But that's what's required.
The best example is, say, for example, the seawall in Margate failed and the whole of the old town flooded. Then there would be an expectation that we would need to do something. We wouldn't go, I'm terribly sorry, we can't clean up the mess because we haven't put a decision on the forward plan 28 days in advance, or it's over the key decision threshold. So it's designed for those big ticket items. It's not a thing for, we haven't quite got the decision making right here, let's use the special urgency. That's not what the intention is at all.
Councillor Austin?
Can I just ask about the alternative options where we're looking at the possibility of consultation with the leader? And as we've got the leader with us, I'm just wondering what his thoughts were about that.
I think in the real world, the Chief Executive would consult with the leader, providing that was possible. But I can't guarantee as leader, and I'm sure no leader could, to be available 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. There are circumstances when, for example, I might be in hospital or I might be on the other side of the world, where that wouldn't be the right thing to do. So I'm more comfortable, I think, with the Chief Exec, and I think that I think it being the Chief Exec as well, Chief Exec being a non-political figure, I think that might give Council some comfort as well, really, that the leader isn't making political choices, even if they have to be held account for them subsequently. So I think it's right it should be the Chief Exec, but I think the way these things work in practice, there's a constant dialogue going on about lots of things between me and the Chief Exec and with Cabinet, so I'm sure it would be it's very unlikely it would happen in isolation in practice.
In that case, any other observations? Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposed by Councillor Britcher. Seconder? Councillor Austin. Do councillors agree? Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, recording of executive and non-executive decisions. Could I ask Ingrid Brown to present the report, please?
Thanks again, Chair. Again, I've brought this report to remedy something that I think should be in the Constitution in accordance with the local authorities' executive arrangements, meetings and access to information regulations, which provide that a decision notice must be published in respect of both, all executive decisions. Our Constitution currently provides for specifically sets out for the provision of a decision notice in respect of executive key decisions, but doesn't address the issue of the publication of a decision notice in respect of executive non-key decisions. And then there are obvious reasons for that, because and councils, when these regulations first came in, really shied away from doing anything at all. But that position, in my view, is untenable going forward. And I think this is something that, the LGA and other councils are really picking up on. And so and CMT have sought to define what we think distinguishes a major operational or an executive decision that's more than merely administrative. And so we've set out, or I set out in the report, a proposal for those matters that we say these regulations should apply to. And when the regulations first came out, there was lots of legal debate about, what was intended by these, because it would be impossible, as I said, to publish every executive decision notice in relation to every executive decision. And leading council certainly took the view that, decisions that were merely administrative should be distinguished from those that were more major operational and required the level of transparency. And so what's proposed is that all decisions, officer decisions of between which incur expenditure, including loss of income between 140 and 250,000, should be there should be a published decision notice. Also, decisions which have been specifically delegated to officers to conclude an agreement or contract with the outline terms agreed by the Cabinet, and or a decision which is controversial and or politically sensitive in nature, or is in the opinion of the Director of such significance that a published record of the decision making which is the only way to ensure sufficient transparency and accountability. So, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Austin?
Can I just ask, under 6.2 in the additional, the annex, no, not in the annex, sorry, in the main report, there's a paragraph just before where the A and B are. The last sentence of that doesn't make sense to me. I think there may be extra words in that should have been deleted. The one that starts in relation. In relation to each of the aforementioned, the regulations provide a written record must be produced. Is it provide that a written record must be produced, or is there something, because there's then something that says, as soon as reasonably practical, a written statement must be produced.
Apologies.
There's just a copying mistake, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly what
just,
it is.
Yeah,
Thank you for
fine.
that. Yeah. I'll ensure, I think there was an amended version of this actually,
Yes,
because I
it's
think
just
Colin
not
pointed
been-
it out, so
yeah.
apologies. I'll make
No,
sure
fine,
that's
that's
remedied.
fine.
Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to make any comments? In that case, could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillors agree?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Item agenda 6, the Constitutional Review Committee Work Programme. I ask Mr Hughes to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. In response to recommendations from both the previous Working Party and others, we have set up a full work programme for the committee, which is at paragraph 3.2, which states the list of things that we are going to look at and the dates of the meetings. So they should all be hopefully in people's diaries now, which should make planning the meetings far easier. Members can obviously add things to this list if they wish. If they want to move things around, that's also fine. Also at paragraph 3.4, members were asking about, in previous meetings, about how things could get onto the work programme. It's our suggestion that members come to Dem Services. We then include them on this report, which will become a standard item at all the meetings. And then the panel will then decide if it wishes to commission a report, and Dem Services would then go away to research the matter, write the report and bring back options to the Constitutional Review Working Party at its next meeting, and then the panel can then have an informed debate and decide whether it wants to send that on to full council or whether it wishes to keep things the same. So happy to take any questions.
Councillor Austin?
Can I just strongly welcome this? This is a really good step forward, I think, and welcome the chance for members to councillors to come up with suggestions, because I remember when I was first elected and I asked how do we get items onto the agenda for the Constitutional Review Working Party. I was told quite bluntly that it wasn't possible to do so. So it's great to see that it is now possible to do so, and that we can actually discuss some of these issues that some of us have been muttering away about under our breath for a while, and I look forward to being part of those discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Councillor Austin makes a good point. I mean, it was very unsatisfactory, really, because it wasn't clear, and I was constantly being told, well, it's up to the leader what goes on the agenda, and I don't think it should be up to the leader what goes on the agenda of the meeting. It's up to the meeting to decide whether it actually wants to take things forward. I'm slightly I'm tempted to suggest to Mr Hughes something that he and I have discussed before about the arrangements for substitutes on licensing and licensing panels, because I think different interpretations of the law operate in different local authorities, and I'd love to have some clarification on that, but I don't know how much enthusiasm there is for that. I mean, just to explain, I think how we operate here is we don't allow substitutes on the licensing board, but we do allow substitutes on licensing panels. Other local authorities of my acquaintance have the opposite interpretation of the law. So I just wonder whether we ought to find out, we may not need to do it in this meeting, but whether we can find out whether we're actually operating properly.
I'm happy to add it to the list of things to have a look at. We'll take that away and have a look and schedule it in.
Would that be 2025? Yes, Councillor Austin.
Are we suggesting things now, or would you rather we emailed you, Mr Hughes?
If you've got suggestions now, then we can take them away. And
One thing that our group suggested at an earlier stage that hasn't made it onto here, but we'd like to be considered, is the possibility of groups having joint leaders, which happens in certain other councils, but is not allowed by our constitution, I understand. And the other one that I'd like to remind people about, although I'm sure it won't gain traction in the current circumstances, is that the previous council voted before COVID that we would explore options for a committee system in order to investigate whether the cabinet system was still working for us. Obviously, our political makeup has changed since then, and I imagine that that will not gain much approval from colleagues, but I would like it registered that that was something that we agreed we would explore and investigate, and just talk to other councils who had different systems to check that what we have is still working best for us. That was obviously derailed by COVID and everything, and never taken forward. Thank you.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, and a couple of Councillor Austin's points there sort of, in some senses, triggers one of the questions I had was, so are we suggesting things for this agenda, or are we voting to add things? Because there's two different things here. Are we deciding what we want to look at for the next year, or are we suggesting things for democratic services to go away and decide? Because one of those is a political point, and let's, the point you made, there are political decisions to be made here. This is a political committee. One of them is an officer decision, and I think, on overview and scrutiny, I'm not clear what side of the, when we sort of suggest things, are we suggesting them for officers to go away and assess and to come back, or are we adding them to a list that in the future will be explored?
I think certainly in this committee, we would we're short-circuiting the process somewhat by, say, for example, if you'd have come with those suggestions outside of the meeting, we would have brought them to the next meeting saying, we've had these suggestions, do you want to add them to your work programme? So we may as well do that now in this meeting. So if there are things that you want us to go away and look at, you can name them tonight and we'll go away and look at those and add them to the work programme. With regards to the other panels, scrutiny is a bit funny, isn't it, in the sense that... Oh, yeah. But yeah, so tonight, yes, if you want us to make suggestions, we will add them to the work programme and then we will go away and formulate proposals and bring them back.
If I may, Chair, may I suggest then that just so we don't get confused on this, if people put forward ideas of things they'd want to include, maybe they justify that, and if somebody's got an objection, then we can debate it. If not, So, for example, I think, and we've discussed this before, the rules around petitions need a review. I think the way that it's structured in terms of the numbers and what goes where, I think would benefit from a review. But that's my view. And as an example, I would think that if we are going to bring things into a meeting, if somebody puts it forward, justifies where they're coming from, unless anybody has objections, then it goes forward with officers. If not, like any other committee, it would be put to a vote. Suggestion on how we can at least deal with this in a structured way. Otherwise, we're potentially going to be butting heads on things about, I don't agree with that, etc.
So do we need to discuss what Councillor Scobie has just said at this meeting now, or do we put it on the agenda for the next one?
I think, as I say, at the end of this discussion, we'll have a list, and then I think it's probably best if we just read the list out, and then members can say, yep, we're happy with that list, add that to the things, or if there are things on that list that ideally you'd like to do it via a consensus, but if there are things that people feel very strongly about, then yeah, we could have a vote to say, actually, we don't want X on the list. That's fine.
So that needs to be sort of debated tonight, what we keep on the list and what we don't. Okay. So, Councillor Crittenden.
On that basis, I'm just curious or questioning the appropriateness of discussing the committee system in this committee. I'm not sure it fits in here.
I was reminding people that it was something that the previous council had agreed to discuss. I'm not sure it's relevant anymore, but it might be something for us to bear in mind.
I think, yeah, it's not something, it's a very fair point to raise, and it's true, but I think it's probably outside the remit of this committee as to whether or not that's, because I think as previously said, that's quite a political thing for officers to make a call on. That's for members to decide.
Councillor Curry.
Yeah, as chair of licensing, myself and the vice chair have discussed raising the numbers on the licensing subcommittee from 3 to 5. I was wondering, would that come through this committee, or would it be dealt with through with the licensing officers?
Mr. Hughes, Ingrid.
I think if the numbers are specified in the Constitution, and off the top of my head I don't know without looking, but I'll check in a minute, then it would need to come back to this committee.
Anybody? Councillor Everett.
Yeah, just on a point of clarification, really. Councillor Austin raises an interesting point about joint leaders of groups, but I assume that it's unlawful to have a joint leader of a council because of the way that the system is constructed around a strong leader. I'm not aware of any councils that have joint leaders. I don't know whether officers are. And presumably that is why the group structure reflects that. I'm not saying whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, Councillor Austin. I'm just asking whether you can actually have a joint leader of a council.
Councillor Austin.
I believe I've just read this morning about a council that has 4 joint leaders, but I may be wrong about that. I will check it up and get back to Councillor Everett. But I was thinking about group leaders rather than council leaders. I know there are a number of councils that permit there to be 2 people sharing the leadership.
That would be one of the things we'd look into as to whether it was legally possible or not as part of the report.
Has anybody else got any observations? Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, so just sort of stepping back from the things that we're potentially adding, can I ask, Nick, if you could go through the 3 areas that are on the agenda for discussion? So we've got questions, speech length, minutes of voting. Can I just understand sort of the intent behind that, just so when the report comes, it's not too much of a shock, and we're going to want to go back into the group, to the Labour group, and I'm sure others will, to get feedback. Then we've got the motions process, and then there's the rules of debate. You could just give a bit of background on those, because it may be that some of the points we might be wanting to add are already covered.
So I think that's a really fair point. And I think before I start doing that, if members moving forward, and certainly members of your groups, if you want to bring something to the panel, to the committee, I'd take, for example, petitions, for example, asking us to review the petitions process is okay, but it would be much better if it was a suggestion that said, I don't like this bit of the petitions because it doesn't really work, rather than saying a holistic issue, because that would help us focus things moving forwards. But with regards to the list of stuff, so questions at meetings, if you remember at the December council meeting last year, council got slightly muddled about what the report was about, and so they referred it back to the Constitutional Review Committee. So that is bringing that back to this panel to see whether or not there's anything that they'd like the panel would like to change, or whether we'd like to push it back to full council, but maybe with a slightly more detailed explanation of what the previous panel thought. So that's what that one about. Speech lengths. Speech length is about the fact that currently, when you're in a committee, particularly at council, well, it's not when you're in a committee, at council, for example, there's a current rule that allows, when you're introducing an item, if you're a cabinet member or a chairman of a committee, you get 5 minutes to introduce an item. But if you're not a cabinet member or a chairman of a committee, then you only get 3 minutes to introduce an item, which seems slightly odd. So it's discussing whether or not members feel that that's appropriate, or if not, then we change it, and if we change it, what do we change it to? And then minuting and voting, we've had a number of queries from councillors regarding how we record our votes and whether or not, at the moment, we just say members agreed or this was not agreed, whether or not we then include the numbers in a vote. It's saying it was members agreed, 10 people voted in favour, 4 people voted against. Now, there are implications of that with regards to whether or not that counts as a recorded vote or not. That's not insurmountable, but if we do want to write the numbers of people who have voted either way, then the Constitution needs to make it very clear that that is not what this council considers to be a recorded vote. So that would require a change in the council's constitution. So motions, generally, yeah, looking at the deadlines, the clarification of the process, who debates them. I think our current chief executive has got, it comes from I don't like to use the word regime, that's not the right administration, practice, ways of practice, that are extremely different to the way that we do those. And I think, as I say, some of the motions we've looked at have not run as smoothly as we may have wished from a procedural point of view, and I think it's just a case of checking to see whether or not our processes match up with other councils' processes, and whether or not we debate enough or too many, and having a look at those sorts of issues, and where things go after they've been debated. That's another one which some councils, for example, will have they'll read out the motion and members will note it, and it just simply gets pushed to cabinet, irrespective of whether or not it's a cabinet function. And then you end up coming back to council because they can't agree it, and all sorts of various different versions of how motions work. The November meeting, rules of debate, number of opportunities to speak on an agenda item. If we're being very purist, when you look at the Constitution, say for example the overview and scrutiny panel, the rules of debate are the same as the rules of debate for full council. Ergo, theoretically, you should only have one right. You only have the right to speak once on an item. Whereas, obviously, some of the smaller committees, so OSP and planning, for example, is another really good example. G&A, you want to be able to, and even, in fact, at this meeting, for example, you want to be able to have a dialogue between people, and if you're going to rigidly enforce the rules, then you can't have that. Ergo, why, if we want a dialogue, why do we have rules that prevent us having a dialogue? Surely we'd want to have potentially 2 sets of rules, one for full council in very formal meetings, another set of rules for committees like this that allow for that dialogue. So that's what that one is about. And then the annual report is just, as I say, at the end of every year, we put together a review of what we've done as a panel, and that goes off to full council for the March meeting of the council.
Can I just ask, have we actually got a date for the November meeting, because it's showing blank?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I will check.
Thank you. Councillor Crittenden?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because Councillor Scobie asked the question, that first item about the questions at meetings, I think that also a part of the recommendation that came from CRWP through standards actually reduced the number of questions that were possible from backbenchers. And I know Councillor Austin queried it at well, she told me she queried it at CRWP. I queried it at standards. It still went through the 3-stage process. And got to full council where we had a backbench revolt from one side, and so I proposed that we chucked it back at CRWP, but it was that part of the recommendation more than anything that caused the problem. So sorry, but I just thought it was worth adding that. Thank you.
Councillor Austin?
I found the council that has 4 leaders. It's Runnymede. There's a BBC. Runnymede Borough Council's new political administration has 4 co-leaders, which has been created after no single party held the majority following local elections this month. The Runnymede Council Alliance will be led by Independent, Labour, Greens and Liberal Democrats. Thank you.
I've got to say, is that written on the Magna Carta, if it's in Runnymede? Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Nick, for that. I think in addition to sort of raising that we discuss petitions, and I think specifically the petitions section I'd like to look at is what happens to petitions in between meetings, because you've got residents who gather a lot of signatures, and because of quirks of the diary, it could be weeks, if not months, before they get an adequate response. And I think we need to more clearly flesh that out so it goes to an appropriate decision-making body quickly, so that those residents feel like they've been heard. And I think Nick and Democratic Services do lots of good work to make sure petitions are heard, but not by the constitutional rules at the moment. And then the second one, which is already sort of covered in that first meeting under speech lengths, I do think we need to have a discussion about the chair's discretion on speeches that overrun, because particularly to your point around somebody who's a cabinet member or a committee chair introducing a motion or an item, particularly when there's time-limited debate. So, for example, on a motion, if somebody is introducing an item and then gets to speak at the end of it to close the debate, and then they overrun, they could be speaking for half of the allocated time for a debate. And from my perspective, even though front benchers obviously have a lot of really, really good stuff to say, I'm not sure chair's discretion is necessarily the correct way to cover that. And I'm not saying I've got views or ideas on how we deal with that, but I think there needs to be better understanding of that, because there have been, in the last year, 2 very sensitive debates where you would not want to cut people off on their discussion, but it did mean that those debates went on for well over an hour, and under the Constitution, maybe it wasn't really covered, so I think it's worth a discussion. So those would be the 2 things that I would ask to be added.
Anybody else got a Councillor Richer?
Yes, thanks, Chair. At a previous meeting, there was definitely a discussion of how many steps were needed for constitutional changes. From 3, I think it was, we're currently a 3-step, and some places a 2-step. Is that something that can be added?
We just changed it to 2. Yes, that's... Yeah.
It was changed at the last meeting. Does anybody else have any observations to make?
Don't reopen that argument. Sorry, through you, Chair. Obviously, we've already got quite an extensive work programme. We're quite a small team. So we will put these... so the speech length overruns will include on the next agenda, because we're already talking about that. The other 1, 2, 3 things we will add later on in the year, if that's okay with... Yeah, so just to clear, so we're going to look at and say, if you're not agreed, I'll read them out one at a time. So licensing subs, which way round is it? Which do substitutions? Do we allow substitutions on the board or on the subcommittees? Everyone agree? Cool. Petitions. What happens between the meetings? In the way that works. Everybody agreed on that? Yep. Speech length overruns. We'll add that into the next one. Happy with that. And joint leaders for political groups. We can have a look and see whether or not that works.
I was just going to say, is everybody in agreement with that list for the next agenda?
Well, for the work programme.
Yeah, for the work programme, sorry, yeah, for the work programme.
Not for the next agenda.
Yeah, work programme. Councillor Scobie.
I'm happy to propose that we add those 4 items.
Sorry, the committee instructions are thought if there are any amendments to the proposed topics covered in the ensuing year. Otherwise, councillors are asked to note the report. Could I please have a proposer? Councillor Scobie, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Austin, do councillors agree? Concludes the business of the meeting.
Oh, just to say that we did receive apologies from Councillor Scott, just for the record.
Before we close the meeting, should we have an AOB at the end of this sort of meeting or not? No.
No, no, Chair.
Just to clarify.
I've just received apologies from Councillor Green for tonight.
Thank you.